Kesha Daniels had always prided herself on doing her job well. For her, it wasn't just about serving food or taking orders. It was about ensuring that every person who walked through the door felt respected, valued, and treated with warmth. Her goal was simple: to make people feel a little better after visiting, even if just for a moment. For 5 years, Kesha had been a regular face at the McDonald's on Highway 29 in Auburn, Alabama. She knew the local customers, from the early risers grabbing coffee, to the after-school crowd, to the late-night patrons looking for a midnight snack. Most days blended into one, but that Tuesday was going to stand out. As the lunch rush started to calm down, the door opened, letting in a stream of sunlight. Kesha didn't initially pay much attention. Just another customer, she thought. But then something shifted in the room. The conversation slowed, and a few people looked up. The atmosphere felt different, though it wasn't obvious why. A young man walked up to the counter, tall and quiet. He was neatly dressed, polite, and alone. As he approached, Kesha noticed something: the red MAGA hat on his head. Alabama wasn't unfamiliar with Trump supporters, but this hat felt different. Something about the man's features, the way he carried himself, seemed familiar. And then it clicked. This was Barron Trump. Kesha didn't hesitate. She greeted him with her usual warmth. "Welcome to McDonald's. What can I get for you today?" she asked with a smile as she reached for the register. But even as she focused on taking his order, she could sense the change in the room. The few customers still inside had become quieter, some sneaking glances at the young man, others staring outright. Barron, however, remained calm. His voice was steady but soft as he ordered. "A quarter-pounder with cheese and a Sprite, please." Kesha nodded, entering the order, and then asked, "Fries with that?" He smiled and replied with a simple, "Sure." She moved to the back to prepare his meal. As she grabbed the fries, she noticed they looked stale, sitting there too long. Without a second thought, she tossed them and turned to the fryer. "Give me a sec," she said, intending to prepare fresh fries. Barron nodded politely, his expression unreadable. He wasn't acting entitled or impatient, just like any other customer. But behind her, Kesha sensed someone moving closer. She turned to see her shift manager, Greg Whitman, standing there, arms crossed, a stern look on his face. "You don't need to do that," he muttered, his tone low but firm. Kesha was confused. "Do what?" she asked. Greg gestured toward the fries. "They're fine. Just give him what's there." Kesha felt her frown deepen. She had been working at McDonald's long enough to know that if food wasn't fresh, it was supposed to be replaced. It was the company policy. "I do the same for anyone else," she replied, trying to stay calm. Greg's eyes flicked from her to Barron. His expression was cold, and he snapped, "Just give him what's there." Kesha refused to back down. "I'm just doing my job." Before Greg could argue further, the fryer beeped, and Kesha grabbed the fresh fries. She set them on the tray and walked back to Barron. "Here you go," she said with a practiced smile. Barron nodded, thanking her, and as he reached for his tray, Greg's voice rang out. "Kesha, in the back now." The words hit her like a punch. She felt her stomach twist. She had been working at McDonald's for 5 years, double shifts, holiday hours, and filling in whenever needed. And now she was being called to the back like she was the one who had done something wrong. Kesha forced herself to stay calm and professional as she passed the counter. She caught a glimpse of Barron watching her, his eyes flicking between her and Greg. She pushed through the door into the small manager's office, the stale scent of coffee filling the air. "What the hell was that?" Greg demanded, his arms still crossed. Kesha turned, her brows furrowed in confusion. "What was what?" she asked. Greg continued, his tone accusatory. "You went out of your way for him. Just serve him the fries." Kesha let out a frustrated breath. "I went out of my way to do my job," she replied. "If it were anyone else, you wouldn't care." Greg's jaw tightened. "You don't get to make those decisions." Kesha's heart sank. "Since when is giving customers fresh food a problem?" she asked, her voice steady. But Greg didn't answer. Instead, he just stared at her, his gaze colder than before. And then she understood. "This is about the hat," she said quietly. There was a pause, and Greg nodded slightly. "You knew people would talk. We don't need that kind of attention," he said with a dismissive wave. Kesha's chest tightened. She had just done her job, but now it was being twisted into something more. After a long silence, Greg sighed. Corporate doesn't want the headache. We can't have customers thinking we're supporting. He trailed off, not finishing his sentence. But Kesha understood. It wasn't just about fries. It was about politics. And that was when she knew. She was being fired. Effective immediately, Greg said. His words hit her like a blow. She opened her mouth to argue, to fight for her job, but the look in Greg's eyes told her it was already over. As Kesha walked out of the office, she felt empty. She had been let go for doing the right thing, for simply doing her job. Outside, the sun was still shining, the cars were still moving, and life seemed to go on as usual. But for Kesha, everything had changed. In her car, she sat silently, her mind racing. Rent was due, bills were piling up, and her son Jordan had no idea his mom didn't have a job anymore. She couldn't tell her sister, who would say, "I told you so," or her best friend who was struggling herself. She needed a plan, but as she drove home, she couldn't help but feel lost. When she pulled into her apartment complex, the weight of the situation settled in. No job, no income, no backup plan. But then her son's voice called from the hallway. "Mama?" he asked, surprised to see her home early. She forced a smile and kneeled in front of him. "Mama just has a little extra time off," she said, ruffling his curls. He grinned and asked if they could go to the park, and she nodded, holding back the tears. That night, as Jordan slept, Kesha couldn't sleep. Her mind was racing, and she checked her phone for any updates. And then she saw it. Her story had gone viral. A video of her interaction at McDonald's had been shared everywhere. Kesha's name was all over the internet, with the headline, "McDonald's employee fired for being too nice to Barron Trump." By morning, her phone was blowing up with calls and messages. People had seen the video, and many were outraged by how she had been treated. As she scrolled through the comments, she realized her story had struck a chord with people across the country. Some were calling for justice, while others defended McDonald's. But it wasn't just the public attention that shocked Kesha. It was the opportunity that came next. Her phone rang, and it was a call she never expected. "This is Laura Trump," the woman said. "We need to talk." Laura explained that what had happened to Kesha was unacceptable. "You did your job, and you were punished for it. We want to help," Laura said. She offered Kesha a job, something better than McDonald's. Kesha was stunned. She needed a job, but taking an offer from the Trumps came with its own complications. After some consideration, she declined the job, but the donations and support from strangers helped her start over. In the end, Kesha decided to take her future into her own hands. She used the money raised for her to start a catering business, something she had always dreamed of. And as her business grew, Kesha realized that sometimes the worst situations lead to the best opportunities. She had been fired for doing the right thing, but in the end, that's what had given her the freedom to create her own path.